let's get started. So, I've had the opportunity to talk to most of you today. I think one or two people didn't end up setting up some time with me. Pranav, I don't think you set up time with me
No,
today.
I did. I already checked for tomorrow morning.
That's fine. So, if anybody misses getting one of the slots, right? So, just drop me a message on WhatsApp and we'll figure out another time in the day. So these are times that I know for definitely that I'm free, right? And there'll be other points of time where I may be free and we can connect then, right? So we can coordinate and connect then. Okay, great. So everybody's been warming up. I can see that some of you have caught on to the technique quite nicely. Others are still continuing to warm up, and that's don't worry about it. This is something that you're not familiar with doing. It's a new skill, or it's a skill that you've maybe not practiced for a while, and you're starting from probably at the end of a hectic work week. So between today and tomorrow, I'm pretty confident that we'll have all your engines humming very nicely. Great. So I'm going to do one thing. So I'm going to just do a recap of what we discussed on the first day and the second day. So there will be a bunch of repetition that will happen through this course. It is also part of the oral tradition, right? So the method of delivering this technique, this learning, this understanding by the Buddha was at a time when the oral tradition was prevalent. Today, we learn a lot of things visually because of the access to the written and printed word, access to visual, animated, and video information. So there is a lot of information that is available to us, which is hello. Am I audible clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so there's a lot of information that is available to us that we look at and we understand, we interact with visually, right? And at the time that these teachings were made available by the Buddha, it was following the oral tradition, and the oral tradition works in a very effective way. So I found personally found that listening to discussions about the mind, they seem to settle in a very different way, and also they get enriched over a period of time. So when you hear something for the first time, it appears to you a little differently. The next time you hear it, especially once it is enriched by the context of your own experience, of your own practice, right? So it registers in your mind a little differently, right? So it's very interesting, the oral tradition. So you will find me repeating a lot of things. Repetition is a major part of it, and reminding you of what we discussed and over the last few days, and setting the context for what we'll discuss today. You'll find me doing that through the course of this retreat. Okay, so on the first day we talked a little bit about uh, the practice itself, setting up the practice. We talked about the first skill, which is using the 6 R's, right? So using harmonious practice, being able to get your attention out of a certain place where you didn't intend it to be. So when your attention has gone to a distraction, when your attention has gone into some kind of obsessive thought pattern where you didn't really intend to be, you were busy doing something else, you were busy in some activity and your mind drifted away, right? How do you get it back without fighting with it, without struggling with it? So that's the first skill, harmonious practice, 6 R's, recognizing that attention is engaged with something, letting it be, not giving your attention to that distraction. Your attention is the fuel that sustains that distraction. Deciding not to continue giving attention to that object, relaxing any tension and tightness in your mind. So this literally physically tangible feeling of latching onto something, grasping onto something, right? So that is a tangible symptom of craving, right? Of your mind getting completely attached with a certain object or certain thought process, right? We relax the tension and tightness, let that be, smile, further relaxes our mind and starts our movement towards a uplifted, unworried calm state of mind, right? We smile and come back to the object of meditation. And we repeat this as many times as required. So that is the first skill, the skill of harmonious practice that we learn. And every time we recognize that our attention has gone away. So our mind learns, right? Our mind learns from every action that we do. So just as a child learns from their parents, right? The child sees the parents and mimics. How do I talk to people in a certain situation? How do I talk to people in a different situation? How do I respond to a certain situation? Do I show anger? Do I show patience? Right? Just like that. So the mind learns from the actions that we perform. So every action that we perform, the mind is learning something. So one of the things that the mind learns is when we start to recognize that our attention has drifted away from where we intended to place it. So the mind starts to identify this, and helps us to start building the second skill, which is the skill of mindfulness. So I'll just quickly define mindfulness very clearly and what it means. So a lot of us may have heard about the word mindfulness in different contexts, and everywhere it is defined very different. So a lot of people talk about mindfulness as being non-judgmental awareness of the mind's contents or consciousness contents of our consciousness, right? Which I feel is a incomplete definition of mindfulness. So mindfulness is not just understanding what are the contents of your consciousness. It is about actually remembering to observe how attention moves from one thing to another, right? So as we discussed, attention is extremely important because our experience of life is a series of our attention being placed on one thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, and so on. So we want not only to understand where our attention is, but how it moves from one thing to another. And mindfulness is having remembering to observe. So mindfulness derives from the Pali word sati or the Sanskrit word smriti, which means to remember. Right? And of what do we remember? We remember to observe how mind's attention moves from one thing to another. So we want to understand this entire process. Once we understand this little link, how our attention went from this thing to the next thing, and how our attention went from here to next thing. So we are understanding the fundamental thread that ties our entire experience of life. And I don't need to emphasize how important this is to actually understand our relationship with ourselves, with other people, with the world, right? It is all being held together by this thread. So every time our attention goes to a distraction and we use the 6 hours, we are strengthening our second skill, which is the skill of mindfulness, remembering to observe how mind's attention moves from one thing to another. And this can be broken down into a few things. So mindfulness remembers where attention is at the moment. It remembers how it is engaged with where it is, right? Is it with craving, with that tension and tightness, or is it without tension and tightness? It sees what else is vying for my attention. So there are things in your background that come up, they don't take your attention away. Then there are things that come up in the background and they take your attention away, right? So what is vying for my attention? And when something actually takes my attention away, how my attention moves from here to the next point. So that's what we want to understand, what we want to remember to observe. Now this sounds like a very very challenging task, so we don't go about it by determining simply I'm going to observe every single moment of where my attention is. Okay, so if we make that the task, then uh, it becomes very hard to actually follow what's happening. What we're doing is this learning is happening in the background. Every time we use the 6 hours, we are strengthening our ability to be mindful. And through this practice, we'll continue to improve the mindfulness, and we'll also start to develop more techniques to refine our mindfulness. Okay. So we talked about these two skills. We talked about how attention is critical. I just recapped it slightly for you. Attention is essentially determining the experience of your life. And that is why we are working with an exercise that trains our skills with attention, right? And how we do it is use an anchor for our attention, and every time our mind wanders away, we bring it back. The anchor that we are using is the feeling of metta or loving kindness. We start by wishing ourselves well, using a happy memory from the past, the feeling from that happy memory. We bring it up. We wish ourselves that maybe feel happy like that, right? So we are sending that wish to ourselves, and then after 10 minutes, we are sending that wish to a friend. So that is the anchor for our attention. And every time our attention moves away, we are using the 6 hours. By doing this, we are learning about craving. We are learning about how our attention is engaged with tension and tightness, with craving to a particular situation. And we are also learning how to bring it back gently. And we are also starting to become more conscious about how attention actually went to that other place. So why, while it was staying here, how did it end up going to another thought? So we are learning a lot about our mind. This may not be apparent at the moment, but already I'm sure, and I have discussed this with some of you in your interviews, you have started noticing during your day that tension and tightness, that little bit of tightness appear in your mind. You have started noticing when suddenly your attention has started going somewhere and doing things that you didn't intend it to do. You were busy with something and suddenly you found your attention going somewhere else, right? So that's been some of the interesting things that we talked about so far. Today we're going to talk a little bit about distractions. By now, all of you have become familiar with distractions, like, and perhaps more than you would be normally. Yes, you may understand that. Yes, my mind is prone to distractions at some level, but when we actually sit, spend some time trying to request our attention to cooperate with us, we actually start understanding the kind of onslaught of different thoughts, different distractions that's actually happening in our mind. And that's happening 24/7 with us, right? So that's happening throughout the day at all points of times. It's just that we don't always understand how that is happening, or we don't pay attention to it because we are always engaged with the external world, right? So we'll start with this, and I will also read an excerpt from a sutta for those of you who have heard suttas in earlier practices that you've done, or you've heard me read any suttas, right? Or any my teacher Bante Vimalaramsi or Bante Damagavesi, if you have heard them read any suttas, so you may be familiar with it. For others, I'll introduce what a sutta is, how it's a critical part of the oral tradition. Read an excerpt from a sutta. Just hear uh, a little bit about the way the Buddha used to deliver his teachings, right? And that will be relevant to what we're going to discuss today, which is distractions, right? And we'll end this with today's talk with a brief introduction of the third skill. Okay, so that is something we'll cover in more detail tomorrow. Then the third skill is that of collectedness. Okay, so that's what we'll cover today. Uh, just give me a moment while I share my screen and I'll use some visual aids. In the meantime, if there are any questions, thoughts that weren't covered one-on-ones, or anything from yesterday's talk that you want to ask, I'll just give you a minute to, if there are any questions, just to address that. Okay, great. Great. So this is an image that represents how we start off. Our intention is, okay, we have a field of attention, right? So there are things apart from the object, there are other things happening in the background also, right? When we begin. And we ask our mind to cooperate. We say, let's keep the object of meditation, sending metta to ourselves or to our friend at the center of our field of attention. And we stay there for a little while. For some, it's a few seconds. For some, it's half a minute. For some, it's a minute. For some, it's more. And what happens after a while? A lot of little things may come up in the background. And sometimes what happens is they stay in the background and we don't chase after them. Sometimes you may have a little bit of music playing, you may have a little bit of visualization, but you know you are continuing to be with the object of meditation. You're staying with your friend or with yourself, right? So you know that, and you let that distraction be. What happens is many times a lot of these distractions will just simply disappear, right? After a while, they'll disappear because you are no longer paying attention to it. We talked about a couple of examples yesterday of how your attention is the fuel for a distraction. For example, one example we discussed was if you stub your toe, right, while you have nothing else to do, then your attention will stay with that thought. Why did someone place this thing here, right? And how much it is hurting you, and why does this always happen to you, etc. Right? And if you have something important, you just simply go ahead, you don't stay there. So your attention becomes the fuel for that distraction, right? Somebody makes a comment about you, and at that time you are very preoccupied with something that is more important, and you don't really register or you don't even think about the comment. But another time when you have attention to give to that comment, you think about it, and you can get agitated or emotional or flattered or whatever depending on that comment, right? So your attention is the fuel for any distraction. What happens is, so when multiple things are happen coming up in your field of attention in the background, at some point, if you are unable, you end up giving your attention to it, right? So right now you're not completely in charge of your attention. Your attention goes towards that distraction, starts digging a little deeper. Okay, so I have this email to send it out. Should I write it tonight or should I write it in the morning, right? How urgent is it? What does it say about me? If I write it tonight, am I giving the wrong message to my colleagues that I work all night, I'm ready to work all night? What if I send it in the morning? Do people think that I'm not taking it seriously? You start thinking, and suddenly the object fades away, right? You're completely in that thought process. Okay, what's going to happen? How will this affect me? How will this affect my team? Right? Anything. So this is one example, right? It could be anything else. It could be about something someone said to you. It could be even about somebody slamming the door in your house, and you start thinking, why did they slam the door? I've told them that I'm going to be sitting for meditation, and still they have gone ahead and slammed the door. Or you start thinking about some friend and you wonder what they're up to. Like, so for some reason that, you know, you started sending metta to your friend, and maybe some other person from that time came up in the background, and you started thinking about what's up with them. I've not talked to them for a long time, right? And you start totally getting involved in that story, and you forget that you're with your object, right? So what we need to understand is two things. One, that the distraction is an impersonal phenomenon. Most of the times, we are not choosing to get distracted. We chose to sit down and we chose to place our attention with the object of meditation. I'll bring up that happy memory. Step one, I'll wish that feeling to myself. Step two, and I'll wish that feeling to my friend. Step three. Easy peasy, right? But what happens is things come up. Why do things come up? Things come up because the conditions are right for them to come. Something or the other has triggered a thought, right? So this can be related to recency, things that happened recently, things recency in the past, things that have happened recently that you've had to do recently, or things that have recency in the future, right? Things that you have to do tomorrow, you have to get done by next week or next month, right? So those kind of things can come up, or it can come up according to importance. So something may be 5 years down the line, but it may be very important, and it is something that you have spent a lot of time thinking about. It can come up too. But the important thing to understand is that you did not ask this distraction to come up. You did not bring it up. Right. So this is very important for us to understand that all the things that we think, the things that we experience, we often feel that So when we don't go into this detail, when we don't observe our mind closely, we have a story that I felt like this, I did this, then I felt like this, then I did this, then somebody else did something, they irritated me, I did something, then somebody else did something, I felt very happy, and I did something else, right? So this is how we narrate our past to ourselves. And what we don't understand is things are coming up because the conditions are right for them. In the environment, things may be coming up because the conditions are right for them. Your phone may run out of battery before an important call because the conditions were right for them. Somebody you see might behave in a certain way. Maybe they had an argument before encountering you, or maybe they got some good news before encountering you. They behave in a certain way, they say certain things because the conditions are right for them. Similarly, thoughts that come up in your mind come up because conditions are right for them. It gets sustained in our attention when we go after it with craving. We don't do it actively, but our mind is conditioned that when something like this comes up, I get attached to it. So I want to discuss a little bit about craving. Okay? So how does craving come about? What is the background of this? Why does our mind get so distracted when we ask a simple thing, right? So it is like if you asked, you have a employee reporting to you, and you ask them simply, for the next 30 minutes I just want you to stack this, you know, box of pencils one after the other, right? And they don't get that task right. It seems ridiculous why they can't get that task right. And with our mind, we are literally asking it to do very simple things. Step 1, bring up a happy memory. Step 2, send that feeling to myself. And step 3, send that feeling to my friend. Extremely simple instruction, right? So why is it that our mind is getting distracted? So for this, we will just go a little back into our evolutionary history, right? So if you look at it, there are three things that so any organism that is alive today, any living being, right? So whether it is a dog, it's a human, whether it is a fish, right? So they are good at one thing. They are good at passing on their genes before they die, right? So one of the fundamental skills that our body, our mind body system, irrespective of anything else, that it is designed to do is to pass on your genes before you die. And this basically comes down to three fundamental areas, right? So one is harm avoidance, right? Second is energy conservation, and third is reproduction. So I'll just go through these one after the other, right? Harm avoidance. So if I get injured, right, I will not be able to operate effectively. So think about this in the context of a prehistoric time when we were living exposed to the environment. Today we live in a very safe space. Today we can order food on Swiggy or a Zomato. Today we can get almost anything delivered at home. uh, Life is ridiculously safe compared to the environment in which our evolution has its origins, right? So any organism to survive, it needs to be able to get enough energy so it can survive to the next day. Energy conservation simply means being putting in more food or energy than you are spending, right? So if you spend more energy than you're putting in, you're going to die of starvation. So energy conservation is important to stay alive. And if you, even if you have a certain amount of food, you may be expending a lot of energies. For example, if you're sleeping in the cold, you may end up expending too much energy, and again you may die of an energy deficit. So the organism learns to collect enough energy and to take actions that reduce the wastage of energy. So energy conservation is the primary thing. Harm avoidance also relates to energy conservation. So if I'm crippled, for example, it may affect my ability to find food, or it may affect my ability to run away from a predator. Or if the harm is serious enough, it may just lead to my death immediately before I've had a chance to pass on my genes. So every living organism has automatic mechanisms for energy conservation, for harm avoidance, and for reproduction. passing on the genes. So that is a fundamental skill, no matter what else we can do, whether we can sing or not, whether we can draw or not, whether we can speak well or not, whatever skills we have, these are the fundamental skills that are hardwired into our mind, into our body, into our DNA, right? So these are the skills that are being hardwired. And for these skills to be effective, for us to be able to conserve energy, for us to be able to avoid harm, for us to be able to reproduce, we need to be extremely aware of our environment. So that is how the evolutionary development has happened, right? So at all points of time, uh, in the evolutionary process, we've been interacting with the environment and trying to seek as much information as possible to understand whether this is good for energy conservation or bad for energy conservation, good for harm avoidance or bad for harm avoidance, good for reproduction, bad for reproduction. So this is something that we have constantly been, that is the reason why our mind is constantly seeking information, because it is related to its very survival. The fundamental three things that the drive to conserve energy, drive to avoid harm, drive to reproduce. So these drives are hard coded into us, and we are always seeking information. And essentially, what happens is our mind starts to this. Our behavior gets affected by certain chemical balances. So if something in the past we've interpreted as something that is good for our survival, good for harm avoidance, good for energy conservation, our attention will go towards it. We'll have a very pleasant feeling associated with it. Or if there is something that is harmful for us, our attention will still go after it, but it will say, I don't want this, right? So craving is what latches your attention onto a certain piece of information. It says, I want this or I don't want this. Now, the same thing through the advent of culture, development of this entire complex of information that we live in, right? So the same kind of value judgment is coming towards every information, right? So if I, see, have the information of a share price going up and I'm able to make a sale at the right time, it seems to me as something that is good for, say, all of these things, for energy conservation, for maybe for reproduction. I'm a more desirable mate. I'm able to have more money than I'm spending, right? So these kind of underlying motivations get translated into a very different context. It can also happen uh, for any kind of thing, right? So I want it and I don't want it. So our mind tries to reduce every situation into whether I want it and I or I don't want it. And craving is the force or the mechanism that latches onto that particular piece of information with the feeling of I want it or I don't want it. So this is what is happening. Our mind, even though we are in a safe space, even though evolutionarily we are not in the jungle, we don't have the threat of a predator. At least in this group, we don't have a worry about food security. We will be able to have enough energy to be able to sustain whatever we are going to spend, right? So even though we don't have those kind of threats, and we have an option to reproduce, like we are not at that moment deprived of it, right? So without having those kind of existential actual survival challenges, at the same time our mind continues to seek information. It doesn't stay at rest. It is always seeking information because it is afraid that it will miss a threat or miss an opportunity. Missing a threat will mean harm. Missing a threat may mean end of life. Missing an opportunity may mean your energy conservation goes for a toss. You may starve to death, right? So that is what it used to mean in our evolutionary history. But now it is associated. That same wanting, I want this, I don't want this. That kind of judgment comes into any piece of information that one. So we are essentially filtering the universe through a lens of I want this, I don't want this. I want this, I don't want this. Even then, we are getting a lot of information, right? At any point of time. Our mind needs to decide which ones are important, which ones am I more attached to. I want it, I don't want it. So the distractions that take your mind away are the ones you are more attached to, right? And the distractions that your mind sees as a bigger threat or a bigger opportunity, distractions that don't take your attention away, are ones that you don't really care about too much. The attachment is very low. And this may be something very silly, right? Like it may be simply You ordered a shirt of a certain color and you got a slightly different shade. Even that can be, your mind can process that as something that is as existential as being running away from a wild animal, right? So you don't know exactly how your mind is processing it today. If your mind gets stuck with a distraction, it is a symptom that your mind sees a big threat or opportunity in that. It sees, it is attached to that thought process, right? So that's something very interesting that you'll observe when things start happening in your mind, right? And because of this, we need to teach distractions as our teachers or as our personal trainers. Every distraction is teaching us where our attachments lie, what we take personally, what we like or don't like, what we want or don't want. And all of this is becomes personal, right? The easiest way for our mind to take action is to make something personal. It's about me, right? So I like it, I don't like it. It is good or it is bad is not something to drive us to action. Do I like it? Do I not like it? Do I not care about it? If I don't care about it, my mind attention won't go about it. Think about it. You probably paid your electricity bill 10 years ago, but that has not come up in your mind. You have no opinion about it. You don't want it or you don't not want it, right? So you don't care and it comes and it goes. Your attention doesn't go after it. But things that you want or don't want is what your attention goes after. How exactly is it that you want it? We won't go into that story. We won't go into why is it that this thing came up and not another thing at this moment. We just want to see certain things. We want to understand these are the things our mind is attached to, right? These are things that we take personally. It could be unresolved issues. Distractions could be related to unresolved issues. There is some action pending. Like again, the bill is an example of a completely resolved issue. There is no action remaining in that, and that is why it is unlikely that our mind will go towards that. Unresolved issues also have you wanting an outcome. I want something to happen. I don't want something to happen. Right? Unresolved issues, or I don't know what should happen, but I know that something needs to happen. I want to know what to do. I don't want to be without an understanding of what to do. What the tendency of our mind is. So what is the inclination of our mind? Where our mind goes if we are not alert about uh, how attention is moving. And finally, distractions also provide us that opportunity. So every time we do that loop, stay with our anchor, our object of meditation, mind drifts away, we bring it. Every time we do this, we are strengthening our mindfulness. We are remembering to observe how attention moves from one thing to another. We are learning more about it. We are strengthening our ability to do harmonious practice. That tomorrow, if in a non-meditation context, you find that your mind is continuously getting stuck in a thought process that you don't want to be in. You actually want to be doing something else and you find that you're stuck there. How do you bring your attention back without fighting? So the 6 hours of the harmonious practice. So every time a distraction comes up, it is doing you a favor by allowing you to do one more rep. Pranab, you will relate with this. It's like a good personal trainer. It is asking you to do one more rep, build your skills. And the other thing that it is doing is it is teaching us, right? These are things that you take personally. The more the craving, the more the tightness, the longer deeper you go into the story, right? The more times it comes up. All these things help you understand how much you have an attachment. Sometimes it may not be a very, very important thing. It may just be something very recent, right? So recent in the past or future. Just something that you want to send out a mail tonight, you don't want to forget about it, and that thing is coming up again. But somewhere your mind is attaching that this is very important, right? So the same way that it would look at a threat or opportunity in the wild, your mind is treating that bit of information as equally important. So next time, like I said, right? So a good meditation is not about clearing our mind. That may be an outcome of the practice that we do. A good meditation is about respecting the distractions that come up because they're teaching us and doing what they're asking us to do really in this context of meditation, which is to exercise your skill one more time of the 6 hours. Great. So one more thing I wanted to touch on are the flavors of this distractions that come, right? So the Buddha, like I said, he had a very analytical approach about explaining things, right? So I'll just read before I go into these different hindrances, I'll just read a small excerpt from a sutta, right? It'll take a few minutes. Sutta or sutra is a word for thread, right? And the way the oral tradition, the Buddha's teaching was presented is you have a number of sutras, number of threads, right? That represent different aspects of different concepts, right? And by bringing these threads together, as you keep understanding them at different degrees, right? So you keep getting exposed to them, keep understanding those teachings, you start understanding the entire fabric of the teaching, because everything in the mind is interrelated, right? Your attention is related to your experience, which, and your attention is also has an interaction with distractions. Your distractions have something to do with your attachments. Your attachments have something to do with your experience. So you have all these interrelated things that are happening in your mind, and each sutta, pulls at some part of this entire fabric of mental experience, life experience that you're having, and we start learning and seeing different aspects of it, right? So these suttas are discourses by the Buddha, and I'll be reading a small excerpt that lays out a little bit about the distractions in the Buddha's words. These are also called as hindrances, right? So they are hindrances to our mental development and are uh, known by the Sanskrit or Pali word nivaran, right? So nivaran or hindrance and or distraction. So I'll just read a small excerpt. This is from the mid-length discourses of the Buddha, right? So there were many discourses given by the Buddha. These are called the middle-length discourses of the Buddha. And the sutta that I'll be using is the Satipathan. So this is one of the most famous suttas in modern times, because a lot of the Vipassana teachings come from, has been extracted from descriptions given in the Satipathan Sutra. Right? So we'll also be reading other sutras during this retreat. And the Satipathan, Sati is the word for mindfulness, right? And Pathan is the Pali word for prasthan or uh, departure. So this is also known as the foundations of mindfulness, right? So mindfulness and its foundations. Okay, so I'm going to read a small excerpt related to our talk about discussion so far about hindrances. I'm using a translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi to do this. The five hindrances. And how, students, does a student abide contemplating mental phenomena as mental phenomena? Here, a student abides contemplating mental phenomena as mental phenomena in terms of the five hindrances. And how does a student abide contemplating mental phenomena as mental phenomena in terms of the five hindrances? Here, there being greed in him, a student understands there is greed in me. Or there being no greed in him, he understands there is no greed in me. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen greed, how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen greed, and how there comes to be the future non arising of abandoned greed. Here, there being aversion in him, a student understands there is aversion in him. Or there being no aversion in him, he understands there is no aversion in me. And he also understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen aversion, how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen aversion, and how there comes to be the future non arising of abandoned aversion. There being sloth and torpor in him. A student understands there is sloth and torpor in me. Or there being no sloth and torpor in him, he understands there is no sloth and torpor in him. He also understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen sloth and torpor, how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen sloth and torpor, how there comes to be the future non-arising of abandoned sloth and torpor. There being restlessness and remorse in him, a student understands there is restlessness and remorse in him. Or there being no restlessness and remorse in him, he understands there is no restlessness and remorse in me. He also understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen restlessness and remorse, and how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen restlessness and remorse, and how there comes to be the future non arising of abandoned restlessness and remorse. There being doubt in him, a student understands there is doubt in me. There being no doubt in him, he understands there is no doubt in me. He also understands how there came to be the arising of unarisen doubt, how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen doubt, and how there comes to be the future non arising of abandoned doubt. In this way, he abides contemplating mental phenomena as mental phenomena internally, or he abides contemplating mental phenomena as mental phenomena externally, or he abides contemplating mental phenomena as mental phenomena both internally and externally. Or else he abides contemplating in mental phenomena the nature of arising, or he abides contemplating in mental phenomena the nature of vanishing, or he abides contemplating in mental phenomena the nature of both arising and vanishing. Or else mindfulness that there are mental phenomena is simply established in him to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and mindfulness. And he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how a student abides contemplating mental phenomena as mental phenomena in terms of the five hindrances. So I'm sure this is unlike any other form of discourse that you've heard. It is repetitive, it is also technical. Right? So let us quickly look at what the Buddha is talking about. Specifically, one thing. So we'll talk about all mental phenomena and then we'll just double click on the different types of distractions. So the Buddha talks about one understanding that there are certain distractions in me and they have a certain flavor, right? The flavors are greed, aversion, sloth and torpor or laziness, restlessness and remorse, and doubt. These are different flavors. This is a classification. Things may have a combination of different flavors as well. Right? But other than this, uh, the Buddha also talks about the arising, right? How did this thing come up? So, understanding how these things came up, understanding how they go away. So, as we continue to pay some attention, so once a mind object or a mental phenomena has come up, if we paid some attention, it continues to be there. If we don't pay any attention, it goes away. If we end up getting distracted by it, we let it go and remove the craving that is underlying. Once we have removed the craving, there is future non-arising of that particular thought. It may come up later, but at that point, that entire cycle is gone. It has come up, it has been abandoned, and there is no future arising as long as the craving has not arisen again. So this is something you'll see continuously, how things are coming up in your mind and how things are going away. Great. So let us go back to the screen and look at the different flavors. Quickly double click on the different flavors of distractions that are coming up in our mind. Okay, so we look at the 5 types of distraction that the Buddha talked about, and I'll share this with you for your reference. So you can think of it as two pairs of siblings and one other very, notorious additional sibling. So you can think of it as two pairs of twins and one other sibling, right? So greed and aversion are very closely related to each other. So like I said, our mind is always looking at threats and opportunities. We want opportunities, we don't want threats. We don't want to let go of opportunities, we want to be safe from threats. So our mind is constantly classifying things as threats and opportunities. Greed is the flavor of things that we want. That I want more of this. I want this to happen. I want, I want it. So it comes with the flavor of I want it. And aversion is something I don't want. Something that I see as a threat. Something that I see is in somewhere in my mind, in my computation, it's looking as something that will affect me negatively, affect my chances of survival negatively, survival and thriving negatively. Examples of greed could be, a craving for a certain type of food. I can't stop thinking about fried food. I really want some fried food right now. I have worked so hard. I want to go out and get drunk or have a cigarette, or I want to watch this entire season of Netflix, right? So binge watching. So there are different types of greed. Your mind has somehow become uh, convinced that this is what I need, right? And this is what, and it is using the same mechanism that, after 2 days of not having food, the same mechanism that triggers when you see a banana tree with bananas on it in your prehistoric condition, right? So it's the same thing that today somehow in your mind conflicts of the concept of a new Netflix series might be kind of triggering the same mechanism. So that is an example of a thought of greed. I want this, I want this, I want this. Aversion may be something I don't want. Okay, I have to have a, maybe I am laying off somebody from my team. I have to have that conversation. I really don't want it. Or somebody said something to me. Maybe a neighbor said something, a family member said something, a colleague said something, and I did not like it. It made me feel diminished. It made me feel disrespected. I don't like it. I have certain thoughts about that person. I don't like that person. So that is a kind of aversion, hindrance of aversion. So these are two kinds of flavors. Then there may be very trivial things that are coming up because of our information seeking behavior, right? So to survive, historically, we had to always look out for information. We always want more information. More information means better chances of survival. So that's what our mind understands. If I'm getting more information from the environment, I can better identify threats and opportunities, and I can better survive. But even when you're sitting in meditation, there's nothing you're going to achieve in that period that is going to affect your survival, right? But still, that same restlessness comes, right? So restlessness is checking your phone again and again. Is there a new email, new update, right? Checking the news again. Is there something new? Scrolling through your Facebook or Instagram to see if there is something very exciting that's happening. So that is comes from restlessness, or just calling up somebody, checking up what's happening, or checking the time to reach a destination on your phone again and again and again, right? So restless. So your mind has this tendency of seeking information all the time. And the counterpart of this, because this is the second pair of twins, right, is sloth. So what happens is, after overstimulation of the mind, after seeking information and analyzing it very aggressively, your mind becomes dull. So it keeps going from information to information, but it's not paying any attention. It's not alert. It's ho humming. It's like a class that you get bored. People are speaking. The teacher is speaking at you. Nothing enters. A meeting that you're zoned out completely. You're not listening. Or after a long day at work, you're sitting with your child, and they're saying something and nothing is registering. Right? So that is a kind of sloth. Or even if you have to do something and you decide to do it, but your mind is saying, okay, why do it, let's do something else, right? So your mind is not it's fatigued from all the restlessness, and it's not interested in being alert and present for something to do. So these two are kind of counterparts of each other, restlessness and sloth, just like greed and aversion are counterparts of each other. And in the center sits a very insidious sibling, which is doubt, right? So no matter what you're doing, right? So when it's something very important, you're going out of your house for a week, you'll check the lock 3 times. Have I really locked my house properly? Have I latched everything? Something you do every day, but you will check further because you have a certain doubt about it. When you're practicing, you'll say, am I doing the 6 hours right? Am I bringing up the feeling right? Am I sending it to my friend? Will I ever succeed at meditating? Will I ever find peace in my mind? So all those questions, we are looking for some guarantee. So the prehistoric creature in us says that, can someone guarantee that I will get food for the next 90 days and there will be no predatory attacks on me for 90 days and the weather will be conducive for me for the next 90 days? Can someone please guarantee this, right? So we are looking for those kind of assurances, but we know through our experience in life that nobody can give us that assurance, right? Anything can happen tomorrow, no matter how much you try to safeguard it, and it can happen to anyone. So we want that assurance. So there is a lot of doubt about what we are doing, whether we're doing the right thing, whether we're doing, you can get caught up into spirals of, did I take the right decision 10 years back? Did I marry the right person? Did I take the right career choice? So you can keep going with it. There is no action that is coming out of it. There is nothing constructive that is coming out of it. There is no insight or knowledge that is coming out of it. You're simply ruminating, hoping that somebody will give you a definite answer, but there is no one to give that definite answer. So this is an insidious sibling of greed, aversion, restlessness, and sloth that can be as crippling as the others, right? And it's also can also be, I mean, fear or uncertainty is also part of doubt. So these are the 5 distractions, and things that come up in your mind will be predominantly one or the other flavor or a combination of certain flavors. So once we start identifying, labeling our thoughts, distractions, our rabbit holes, right, we start understanding the structure of this. The first thing, that these are not things that we decided to bring. These are things that came up because of information seeking behavior of our mind, because of the tendency of our mind to label things as threats or opportunities, because of our uh, you know so this is all coming up because the conditions are right for them, not because we chose for them to happen. And the fact that these are thoughts or these are objects that have certain flavors to it. So once you understand that, you're able to actually see that this is just a thought that has come up, and you can let it be. So this is very important for us to be able to step out of our rabbit holes, to be able to understand thoughts as just thoughts, right? Things that we didn't ask to come up, they came up because the conditions are right for us and because of certain behaviors that our mind has embedded in. Right. So I've been speaking for a long time. That's what I wanted to share about distractions. It's an important part, right? Before we end, I just want to very quickly, I'll just share my screen one last time. I just want to very quickly touch on one small thing, right? So what happens when we teach our mind that, I don't need to get personally attached to every distraction, everything that comes up in my mind. So what starts to happen slowly? And this is a kind of preview for what we're going to discuss tomorrow. So in the prep kit, you might remember there were 3 skills that we talked about. So the first is mindfulness. So let's go back to that. So you're sitting down in your meditation, you bring up the object, which is a gray bubble. After a while, your mind goes into a distraction. Your mindfulness, the exclamation mark, alert you that your mind is now distracted. Use the 6 hours, recognize that your mind is distracted, let it be, relax the tightness in your mind. That tightness is holding your attention onto that as a existential threat or opportunity. You let that tightness be, smile and come back to the object. Again, this happens, again, you do this. And your mind starts to learn. It sees a pattern that maybe, okay, one thing is that I asked, I told the mind that Rajiv asked me to sit and stay with this object of meditation. But I have to go keep looking for threats and opportunities. But the way every time a threat or opportunity comes up and I latch onto it, Rajiv tells me that, hey, this is not so important. Just let it be. Just relax, don't stop latching onto it. Just let it be. Let's come back and stay with our friend. Right. So one, our mind starts to understand this is what's happening again and again and again. So things come up in the distraction, but our attention doesn't go after it, doesn't get latched with craving. Once this happens for a little while, we start achieving a state called collectedness, the ability to be with a certain thought or a certain activity without chasing after anything and everything that comes up in our mind. This is known as collectedness, and over the course of this retreat, we will all develop certain very interesting collected states that you don't encounter in normal life. So we'll get into these collected states where for a significant duration of time you'll find that your mind does not wander away compared to where you started from, right? And you start to understand how it is possible not to force your mind to be with one thing, right? So obviously there is one way of being with an object. So for example, if a lion is chasing you, at that time you're not going to think about anything else, right? So you can be, there can be a fear or greed or aversion can become so strong that you stop thinking about anything else in the world at that point of time, right? You do anything, but that is not a very healthy way to stay, because what we would actually want to be is to be there in a collected way. We are able to understand what's happening, we are able to see what else is happening in the surrounding, but we are also able to take the action that is required without getting into a state of primal fear or primal lust, right? So that is collectedness. That will be the topic for tomorrow. We'll get more into detail, and there are very specific states of collectedness that we can develop with this practice called the jhanas, and we'll talk about that in more detail tomorrow. So I'll take a pause and I'll hydrate. Please feel free to ask any questions.
My request is little you should speak little slowly because it's very fast going, and the grasping comes a little slow. And the mic,
Understood.
I've made my tab little higher, but still the voice is you should be little near the mic.
Okay, perfect. I'm testing out a new mic today, so that was got me late as well. So yeah, I'll test that out. Thank you for that input. Great. Any questions? Anything that jumps out from your practice and what we discussed today?
All the illustrations are very good, Rajiv. They are really very clear. They make the concepts. I've never seen these illustrations before, even though I've been so long. So I really am grateful for the illustrations. They make it the concepts very clear.
Yes, but the most important thing again, no matter how well it is conveyed here, right? Your actual experience of traversing that territory is where you'll get the real learning. So it's very important for and thank you for bringing that up, because uh, it's good to be able to understand these concepts quickly. And one of the efforts of mine has been to kind of put it in a way that it is easier to understand, right? So one of the main motivations for putting this retreat together is that there is such amazing knowledge, but it takes a lot of digging into the suttas, a lot of reading and rereading to actually understand what the Buddha was talking about, because he was speaking in a manner in using the language and cultural terms that were appropriate for his era, right? So yeah, it is very useful to do that, but we at no point of time should we be satisfied with the intellectual presentation or understanding of these concepts. We need to see these things, these phenomena can be seen. So what I can assure everybody, especially those who are practicing for the first time, these phenomena you'll start getting familiar in your own mind, and once you start doing it, so it is a very liberating set of insights, right? You understand how my mind is working, how it tricks me, how it makes me feel a certain way, and how this knowledge, being armed with this knowledge and armed with these skills, we can actually change the course that our mind sets out for us at any point of time. So thanks for sharing that. Any other thoughts or questions? Great. So for those of you who did not, I think Pranab, you were pretty much the only person who didn't connect with me today. So we can connect right after the call, after the talk today. Okay. And I hope all of you have set up times tomorrow in case you run out of slots or you're not able to join at that time. Please drop me a message on WhatsApp and we'll coordinate a mutually workable time. Great. So let's share some merit and we'll bring today's session to an end. May suffering once be suffering free, and the fear struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May enlightened beings of mighty power share in this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sa. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Keep smiling, and we'll connect during the one-on-one check-ins tomorrow.